Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids, and Omari II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Omari, my guy, this week someone asked my kids about school. My 7-year-old boy said recess, of all things, was his least favorite, and my 5-year-old daughter said lunch was her least favorite. I don't know what's wrong with my kids, but it made me wonder, what was your least favorite subject in school?
First of all, that's kind of hard for me to process, not liking recess and lunch. You may have to have a sit down with your kids and just have a long talk about enjoying their childhood, because they have the rest of their life to get into math and social studies. But I would say my least favorite subject was usually just whatever my worst teacher was. I always leaned toward English growing up being my most favorite, just because I read a lot of books and I like writing. Like, that's my day job now and talking to people. But I'll probably say math more often than not was my least favorite. Like, I had some good math teachers that made it fun, but for the most part, just me and math did not get along very well. Bryce, I'm curious, what was your least favorite subject?
Yeah, English was definitely my least favorite, but okay. I agree with you. And here Wes in the chat said math was probably his least favorite, which is interesting because he's really good with numbers, I found out this week as I was working on some stuff. But I agree with you. The teacher really makes the difference. I had a great math teacher whenever I was in high school, and I think that's why I really enjoyed math. But English just, I don't know, I just never got into it. So that was probably my least favorite class to go to.
Well, we're going to have some numbers talk with this pod, so I guess that works out pretty well. And we got to get Wes on here in a speaking role one day, because we always have a lot of interesting Wes tidbits on here, and Wes has never been one presenting them. So maybe that's something we can look at for the future. Anyway, follow us on social media at Motor City Hoops, at Omari Sankofa, and at Freep Sports. Make sure you subscribe to the Detroit Free Press at freep.com. Also, make sure you subscribe, rate, comment, and interact with us on social media. We love it. We love going back and forth, and it keeps us going.
Absolutely. And you only want Wes on here because he always takes your side. So now we can go 2-on-1 against me whenever we have any, need a deciding factor. 3 wins in a row for the Detroit Pistons, Omari. What is going on with the Pistons? And the fan base is up in arms right now about this winning streak.
Fan base is up in arms, and it's just annoying because I've said this before, but win or lose, there is always somebody upset in my mentions, so there's just no way out of it. But the Pistons are playing good basketball. I think that's really it. No Jeremy Grant again. He's been shut down for the season. But you just look at Cade, and he did miss their last game, but Cade played fantastic basketball in March. He's been good all season, but he really hit a new level. You have Saddiq Bey scoring 31 points in about 23 minutes. Just a lot of road guys playing really well right now. Isaiah Livers, Braxton Key's been good. He was promoted to a 2-way contract. You have a guy, Carson Edwards, who comes in like fresh off the plane or bus or whatever he wrote to get to the game. And he had a decent game for a guy who had no clue what was going on. Killian's been better. Isaiah's been better. They're just playing good basketball. Even Marvin Bagley has missed a few games of playing really well. So for a rebuilding team, this is what you want to see. And I know fans are worried about the standings right now, but at some point, you have to see a team start to play better basketball when you're in a rebuild. And they're at that point right now. They're competing every single night.
Yeah, and we will get a lot more into the quote-unquote tank and the standings and what it all means and all of that stuff a little later in the episode. But I do want to talk just the injuries here and talk some. So Chris Smith had another ACL reconstruction and actually lost his 2-way to sign Braxton Key to a 2-way. And then Carson Edwards got a 2-year contract. Can you explain that? And I know, Omari, all this has to do with there's not 10 days left in the season, so you can't sign someone to a 10-day contract. Do we know what Carson Edwards' contract looks like as we record this on late Sunday night?
No, there's still some more clarity on that, but it's like a 2-year deal. He's still in a situation where he has to show and improve. And of course, he'll get some chances to do that. There's 3 games here left. We'll have to see if Cade Cunningham and Corey Joseph return before the end of the season. Would the shock be if one or both are shut down at this point? But yeah, Chris Smith, he retore his ACL and has to get it reconstructed. And that's just tough. I mean, when he was coming out of UCLA before the draft, he tore his ACL last January. And he was a potential first-round guy, and that was a big reason why he went undrafted. Pistons signed him to a 2-way deal last summer. He came in, he worked hard, rehab, played a couple games with the Crews, and then for him to tear his ACL again, the same ACL, it's just a really tough break. So the Pistons moved on. They promoted Braxton Key into his spot. And Braxton, he's had some nice moments. I mean, he's a 6'8" wing. Can shoot a little bit. Philly was playing off of him pretty hard last week, but He did eventually make them pay and knock down a three, but he hustles. Like, he's got good size to be a versatile defender. And he's the type of guy that there's just very little downside to bringing him in on a two-way. He has an offseason ahead, and you can just kind of see what he looks like and if he can become something. So most two-way guys are not going to pan out, obviously, but to me, that's a good guy to gamble on.
Again, I know most of these guys aren't going to pan out anyway. I've told Wes this just in text exchange. I'm fine with Braxton Key, but like, he doesn't really move the needle for me. I'm definitely more excited about some of these other guys, including Carson Edwards, who we'll talk about. But you mentioned Jeremy Grant is out for the rest of the season. They've shut him down. And then unfortunately, and I don't know if he'd still be playing or not, but Marvin Bagley III, he got injured in the game against the Sixers. And before, I want to talk specifically to that play, because Wes and I went back and forth a little bit on this. Did you think that was a uncalled for play from Joel Embiid? Did you think that was a foul that should have been avoided, a play that should have been avoided, and may have, quote unquote, been a little bit cheap?
I mean, I thought it should have been a flagrant. Like, they didn't call it a flagrant, and to me, that's a textbook flagrant when the guy's in midair and gets his legs caught from under him and then falls in that way. And it didn't look intentional to me. Like, like when guys are in midair, it doesn't take a lot of contact for them to fall off balance. So there was more than a little contact there. So obviously a bad play. But I try to judge that stuff by intent. And I think guys in the flow of the game, when you have a guy that's jumping in the air, and we know Marvin can jump, like we said it last week, he had like 31 dunks or something in 15 games. You're just more prone to that type of play. And Joel Embiid, like, I don't think he has a history of dirty plays. I mean, he's a fiery competitor, but I don't think it was intentional. I don't think it was more than what it was, but it should have been a flagrant one for sure. I think that type of play is just always going to be a flagrant one to be, and I was surprised that it wasn't.
Yeah, and I think that's my take as well. And Wes kind of talked me into it a little bit more. I think if you're making that play behind someone who's elevated that way, you can't make any contact like below the shoulders. Like when you start making contact in the lower back, in the legs, if he just would have swiped up top at the ball, I think that was completely different, which he did, but he got his other hand into the lower back of Marvin Bagley III. But let's move into the actual play. And what we got this week, Omari, before that injury, was some Marvin Bagley III and Isaiah Stewart minutes together. What did you think about those minutes? Because I definitely have, I don't want to say some strong feelings, but some thoughts on whether that combination can work moving forward.
For sure. I mean, there's question marks. You have two guys who don't really complement each other that well. Neither of them are good three-point shooters. Isaiah, I think, is pretty close to being a great defender, and Bagley is not, as we've talked about. So on both sides of the ball, they're not really great fits together, but it does force one or both of them to shoot the three well. And that's what Dwayne said before the game, like one or both of them have got to become good three-point shooters. And we've seen Isaiah Stewart take and hit more threes over the last few games. He didn't really do it as much this season, but he's capable of hitting that shot when he's open, and teams tend to play off of him. And, he should punish teams every single time he gets the space to take that shot. And he hit multiple threes, 2 straight games last week. He hit one against the Pacers on Sunday. That's a shot he could hit. It's a shot he works on behind the scenes. It's in his arsenal. And he's just got to be comfortable taking it whenever he's given space. And if he does that, I think that helps that partnership a lot, because if Isaiah Stewart can switch on the smaller players, which he's done consistently well this season, and also knock down threes, I mean, you're a defensively sound stretch five. You can play next to anybody if you can do that. So to me, that's the key. Like, if Isaiah can hit threes and defend, you can play him next to Marvin, you can play him next to Jeremy, you can play him next to anybody, and that's going to help that a lot. So to me, it's like, if Marvin can shoot the three well too, then that's good. But I think Isaiah, even though he's not a high volume guy, he's shown more as a 3-point shooter. And that's the key to that working long term, because the Pistons are probably going to invest in both of these guys long term, especially if Marvin keeps playing the way he's been playing.
They have to be able to do that. Even if they don't make a lot of them, you have to make yourself respectable, or you have to make the defense respect you at the 3-point line. And if you go back and watch that Sixers game, the very first play of the game, they run a screen and roll with Isaiah Stewart, with Cade Cunningham and Isaiah Stewart. Marvin Bagley III's in the backside corner, and his man just stays in the lane and help off. And Kelser kind of calls out Cade for looking to pass the whole time, but that's all he had, because they were just packing the lane. On the ensuing sideline out of bounds, Marvin Bagley III goes back door, but Embiid's camping in the lane off of Stu. So I think both of those guys in some capacity have to be able to, because at some point you're going to want them to play with another big, right? Like, both of those guys are going to have to. Which one do you have more confidence in? Because here's what I think. I think Marvin Bagley's shot looks better. Like, aesthetically, it looks more promising. But I almost feel like I have more confidence in Isaiah Stewart being able to do it consistently.
I kind of feel the same way. And I wish I had like a compelling reason why, but I don't. Like, I just think Marvin has significantly better touch than Isaiah in general. Like, we watch him play, like I'm sorry, Marvin, he's a really good mid-range guy. Like, he can, hit hooks from the free throw line. Like, his touch is great. Yet Isaiah, I think, is like, I like his mechanics as well. I think there's a willingness for Isaiah to do it. Like, he works at it a lot. Isaiah, of course, is younger than Marvin, so on some level, maybe there's some more upside there. And Isaiah's a good mid-range shooter, too. He doesn't take as many as Marvin, but he can hit that mid-range shot. But I think for Isaiah, who's a very habitual player, he tends to avoid doing things that don't come naturally to him. And shooting is one of those things. But if he can get over that hump, to me, there's no reason why he can't eventually become a pretty solid 36% shooter. And that's all you really need to be, for teams to not leave you wide open. So I wish I had a compelling reason why I feel like Isaiah's going to be better. Like, I really don't. Like, I just think from watching both players this season, Isaiah's upside is probably a little bit higher in that area. And I just feel pretty strongly that he will eventually become a three-point shooter. It may not be next season, but by year 5, 6, I think he'll be knocking it down with consistency.
Yeah, and you mentioned his mid-range shot. I think another thing Isaiah Stewart has to get better in is in the short roll. And there's a couple possessions in the Nets game, and I tweeted these out if you follow Motor City Hoops on Twitter. And it's not apples to apples. They're both in transition, but one, he just like double bounce passes one to Saddiq Bey that takes away the shot. And then at the very end of that game, a competitive loss for the Pistons against the Nets, but he makes the completely wrong read when Saddiq Bey was wide open in the corner. So I just think it's those growths that really we were hoping to see from Isaiah Stewart all season offensively that we haven't necessarily seen, but he's giving us that taste again here at the end of his sophomore season to really make us believe that, come back next year, hopefully he doesn't have the rolled ankle, he had that last offseason, that we can see that progression from him on the offensive end.
For sure. And every now and then with Isaiah as well, we'll see him catch the ball behind the arc, and when the defender closes out, like he puts the ball on the floor, he's got decent footwork. He's done it enough times where I just feel like he's a guy that would be able to attack closeouts with consistency once he becomes a three-point threat and guys begin closing out on him harder. Because he doesn't get closed out on hard a lot. Like, guys simply want him to take the shot. But when it happens, he's surprisingly good when it comes to handling the ball and closing out. So if he could do that and then make that second read and find an open man, whether he's in the corner or whatever it may be, that's another element that would unlock him offensively a lot as well. And I'm not keen on him becoming an above average passer, versus him being a good shooter. I just think passing is something that you either have or you don't. Like, I'm trying to think of examples of centers becoming good passers with time. You don't see that as much. But at the very least, if he's a guy that you have to close out on and he can either take the three or he can attack, and if a guy becomes open under the rim or from three, he can just make the simple reads, that would go a very, very long way to him being an above average starting center.
And I agree. I think it's really hard to continually get better and better. I think you can get adequate. He's never going to be a super plus passer based off where he's at right now. Let's move to another guy who's shown some progression. We've talked about him on previous episodes, but I think it's warranted to continue to talk about him because he had a really good week of basketball games against two tough competition in the Nets and Sixers, and then against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And that's Killian Hayes. He had a 25, 5, 5, 5. I don't know how many fives that is. I think that was one too many, but it was the first one of those since Grant Hill. We can talk a little bit, because this has been a big thing on Twitter, about the level of competition in that game, which was essentially a G League game. But I'll say this, Omari. I watched Killian Hayes, as did you, in person last summer at Summer League, and he didn't dominate those games. He was not the best player on the floor, but against the Thunder the other night in what was essentially a Summer League roster, he was the best player on the floor, and I think that's something you can take away from that game.
No doubt. He did not have a great Summer League last year, and if you're an NBA level player, you've got to dominate lower level competition. He did not, so that's probably a cause for worry. But Killian's been a lot better. I think he's gotten better every single month this season for the most part. And he got set back early on because he had the hand injury, and we saw him shoot the three pretty well. And then there was a period of time where that hand was clearly bothering him. And it probably took until about All-Star break until he had enough time to let that hand heal. But the shooting isn't even what's really been most impressive about him. And he has shot it a little bit better in the last week, but it's just the way he's getting to the rim. He's had some really tough finishes we didn't really see from him, whether it's like the high arcing floater or just getting the shoulder into a guy and finishing through contact. He hasn't really shying away from that anymore. He's going into the paint. He's drawing defenders. He's finishing through contact, and he's not avoiding contact. When he gets to still in transition, he's taking the ball on himself. He's dunking or trying to draw the foul. It's all simple stuff, but I think Killian's problem before was that he would leave those simple plays on the table or overcomplicate some of those simple plays. And that's tough. When you have a wide open three and you're passing the ball up, that's the shot that the offense works to get you. When you pass it up, you kind of ruin that. Or when you get to the rim, you have a good look at a layup. Just take the easy money. He's been taking the easy money a lot more. And, it's noticeably helped his confidence. We're just seeing him do some things that he wasn't doing before. And with 3 games left for the season, for him to build that confidence now, 26 points, like 26, 8, 5, 5, 5, however many fives it was you mentioned. But we know that he has that type of upside where he's impacting the game in a variety of different ways. The passing has been there all year. The defense has been there all year, but it's just the scoring. Even if he's just an average scorer, that goes a long way to him being a productive NBA player. So he's starting to show that.
So before I give my take on Killian Hayes, I have to ask you something because we kind of joked about this. You tweeted about, how about the Thunder's court? What did you think about that, Omari?
Terrible. Terrible. It's just like, I'm not opposed to gray courts. Like, I like what Brooklyn's done as far as their whole arena basically being gray. But the shade of gray has to look intentional. And OKC is great and not look intentional.
It looked
like,
unfinished.
I said it on Twitter, but it looked like, you're printing something out and the printer starts to run out of ink and it's just like a really ugly shade of gray. Like, that's how it looked to me. I don't know why of all the grays you could pick, you would pick that gray. That's just an off gray.
It was so bad. And here's the thing. I didn't even realize it because, I had to watch bootleg that night because NBA League Pass blacks me out from Oklahoma City games based on where I live. I get blacked out of like 5 different markets, which is insane.
Really?
Oh, yeah, which is insane for what I pay for NBA League Pass. But another podcast, another soapbox. So I thought it was just like the video I was getting. And then you tweeted about it. Somebody else said something. Wes said something. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's not like just my video. That's really what the court looks like. It looked unfinished. It's like they forgot to put the color on it, which is crazy. And then the other kind of fashion trend that came out of that, how about my guy Frank Jackson bringing back the early 2000s baggy shorts? I love it.
Yeah, we've seen the NBA go in the opposite direction in the past few years, going with the more short shorts. And then Frank's like, nope, they're going to go to my knees. And then after that game against the Pacers, he talked about it. He just said, I just like the 90s, 2000s swag. And it's just funny now, as somebody who started watching the NBA in the early 2000s, like really closely, that's like old school now. But it is old school. You don't see those types of long shirts anymore. So I respect it.
I get clowned by my high school kids if I walk in with shorts that are too baggy. If I wore the pant, like the shorts and the sweats and stuff, the way I wore them whenever I was in school, when I was in college, they would clown me all day long. And then I'd have to give them buckets to make them shut up. But they would they would get after me for it. Let's get back to Killian Hayes, because there were some plays that really impressed me. And it goes back to the Nets game. And he got blocked, the Sixers game. He got blocked by DeAndre Jordan at 7:50 in the second quarter in transition. And that was one of those plays where I feel like in the past you would see Killian Hayes not stay aggressive after that. Like he'd miss a shot, he'd have a turnover, he'd get blocked, and you wouldn't see him stay aggressive. And in the Thunder game, we really saw it. He missed a 3 to start the game, but the next possession he attacked and hits a midi. He missed another shot, but then he came back and hit a 3. I just thought it was really impressive. And you could really notice that change of mindset in some situations like that, where he put a mistake or a miss behind him and was able to stay aggressive.
No doubt. I think Killian's a guy where we've seen him get in his own head a little bit. He may miss a couple shots and maybe you airball one. You could just tell it gets into his head. So that's just a reps thing. Like it's a confidence thing. The more you play, the more mistakes you make, the easier it is to get past it. And Killian's still young too. Like he's not that much older than Cade. He's younger than a few guys who go in the lottery in this upcoming draft. Like he's younger than Keegan Murray, who's a late bloomer in his own right. Every player has their own developmental path, and some guys are going to come out the gate and be good immediately. And some guys it'll take a little bit longer. So I still think there's some stuff Killian has to prove, but he's starting to show some things he hadn't shown. And it just shows that it's a process for every guy. Some guys won't get there at all, but you have to give them some time to figure it out.
So if I'm being completely honest, Omari, I came away from that Thunder game with this question, though, because I think all things revolve around Cade Cunningham. I think we can agree on that. I think most of the fan base can agree on that. It really made me wonder if Killian truly is best with the ball in his hands. And you're not going to take the ball out of Cade Cunningham's hands to put it in Killian Hayes in the starting lineup or what. So I'm not saying they can't coexist at all. I'm not saying you have to ship Killian Hayes out of town. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just like that game made me wonder if Killian Hayes truly is best coming off the bench or getting as many minutes as possible without Cade on the floor because he needs the ball in his hands.
I think the make or break thing for Killian is just being able to knock down open threes. If he can knock down those threes, push the ball in transition, and pick up the tougher defensive backcourt assignment between him and Cade so they can save Cade, because Killian is a better defender than Cade, it can still work. But Killian just has to be able to knock down open threes. And even though he's improved inside the arc, to me, that's just a make or break thing as far as Killian and Cade working out long term. Like, Killian could be a backup point guard, and that's still fine. Like, if your backup point guard is the best perimeter defender on the team, best passer on the team, and an okay offensive player, like, that's fine. Like, I know people bring up number 7. There was like 3 guys in that draft who appeared to have like all-star upside, and after that, it was a free-for-all. So, I said it last week, but I just don't think getting a really good role player for the 7th pick is an inherently bad thing. But he's got to be able to shoot the ball. He's played a lot of fourth quarters alongside Cade. They've closed out games into one, games together. That partnership could work, but he has to be able to shoot, and that's the bottom line. If Killian can't shoot, then that partnership's not going to work out as well.
And we will talk about Cade specifically when we start off segment 2 and talk about the Rookie of the Year race a little bit. So trust me, guys, we're not overlooking the best player on this team. And he had a couple big games this week as well before he kind of got shut down. And as you alluded to, Omari, I'm sure you know, and you're just not going to tell me because you never tell me. You're not going to tell me whether we're going to see him the last 3 games of the year or not. But I'm going to say that I don't think we see Cade Cunningham the rest of the year, and that's with no inside information whatsoever. Saddiq Bey, man, he continues to just make shots. And he was 6 of 6 at one point in the game on Sunday night against the Pacers. I believe he's like 23s behind Damian Lillard. I believe that's right, for the second most in the first 2 years of a player's career. He maybe not get that, but he only played 72 his rookie year because of the COVID shortened season. This man just continues to do really good things. And you had a really interesting tweet about his ceiling.
I did. I tweeted during the game. It's probably time to just reevaluate what his ceiling is. And maybe I'm late. Like, I'm sure there's some fans already comparing him to Kobe Bryant, but he's been playing really well. Like, he's been playing
Thompson.
Really well.
Klay Thompson. That's the one I get all the time right now.
And I've seen Klay Thompson as well. And I'll just say, like, not to dump cold water on it, because I do think Saddiq Bey can be an all-star tier player if it all breaks right for him. But this is the first season of Klay Thompson's career he shot lower than 40% from 3. And he's coming off of 2 devastating injuries. Klay is such a good shooter that I'm sorry. Like, Saddiq Bey is a really good shooting guard. But to compare him to the second greatest shooter of all time, like, I'm sorry. He is going to be a really good shooting guard, small forward, whatever. But he's not going to be like Klay. Klay is just an entirely different level of shooter that, I mean, only a handful of guys in NBA history have ever been on that level.
And honestly, Omari, when he was good before he was injured, he was an entirely different level of defender than Saddiq Bey as well, at least on the ball.
No doubt. Like, it's just, Klay is in his own tier. Like, I'm not ever going to compare anyone to the second greatest shooter of all time. And I also say that Klay should have been on that NBA 75, but that's a whole different debate. But
mark it down, Wes. Put that down with the KD. We got all these topics to come back to.
Another comparison I've heard for Saddiq, even for people within the organization, is Chris Middleton. And I like that one a lot because Chris Middleton is a very good shooter, very good defender, and you can get some secondary playmaking from him as well. And I think that's probably more the type of player Saddiq will be. A guy that can really hit up from 3, be between 37 and 40% every year, handle some secondary playmaking, you're comfortable with the ball in his hands, and he can handle some defensive assignments as well. And to me, that's an above-average shooting guard. Like, I could see Saddiq averaging like 17, 18 a game with decent efficiency next year, because that's basically where he's been at for most of 2022. And he can heat up, and he will have nights where he looks like Klay. Of course, he was 6 for 6 in the opening 6 minutes of the game tonight. So that's where the Klay comparison comes from, the way he heats up. But it's just Klay is a threat to do that every single night. And if Saddiq's a threat to do that every single night, then we're talking about an entirely different tier of player. But I watched Klay Thompson score 37 points in one quarter. Like, that's just, I don't want to set expectations too high for anybody, but I do think Saddiq can become an all-star level player.
Absolutely. I do think there's a chance we see him be a multi-time All-Star. I just don't think he's going to be like every single year for like 10 years. I don't see that, but like he's definitely improved throughout this season. He's going to continue to improve. We got to get to segment 2 here, Omari. I wanted to get into the John Beeline article because I texted you this morning. That article was tremendous. It was awesome insight. So if you're listening to this, go check out freep.com. Go check out Omari's Twitter and make sure you read that article about John Beeline, and maybe we can work that into the episode next week. But right now, we got to take a short break. Make sure you come back from this. We're going to give you some more Pistons and some general NBA talk with the tank race and the other end of the standings to talk about some teams at the top of each conference.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Benares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some Free Press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
So I promised some Cade Cunningham talk here in segment 2, and I want to lead off with this. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and I don't want to call it out because, I'm afraid to. I just don't want to do that because I do enjoy the podcast. But they were talking about the Rookie of the Year race. I know we've talked about this, Omari, but one of the co-hosts said that they would take Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley as co-Rookie of the Year. One said Scotty Barnes, and then one of them even went on to make the argument that Jalen Green has actually been better than Cade Cunningham post All-Star break. And I'm not going to lie, I started to get a little offended.
Yeah, I think the thing with any national debate for national people is that they tend to only focus on certain teams. And I think Evan Mobley and Scotty Barnes, because their teams are in the playoff hunt, have probably been watched more just because if you're a national guy, you're just naturally going to watch those teams more often because they're in the playoff hunt. Like the Pistons, outside of having Cade, have not had much national relevance. And that's kind of how it goes. With that said, I do think it matters that Cade has been a number one guy on this team, and his job is inherently harder compared to a guy like Evan Mobley. And look, I will say that if Evan Mobley wins Rookie of the Year, I won't argue against it at all. He's had a great season. He's deserving for sure, as is Cade, and you can make an argument for Scotty as well. This rookie class is just different. But Cade is the number one option. His numbers, his efficiency have been significantly better since All-Star weekend. And if you just cut out those initial 10, 11 games when he was coming off the ankle injury, which clearly affected his shooting and he was rusty, his efficiency has been fine. He's been average efficiency for a point guard as a number one option on a team that's going to finish with a bottom 4 record. And when you add in the playmaking and the rebounding and his defense, he's really been a full package this year. So if you think Scotty's Rookie of the Year, I won't argue strongly against it, but Scotty has never been lower, or I should say never been higher than the third option for this team, and Cade's been no worse than the second option for the Pistons all season, and more often than not, number one. To me, it's a race between Cade and Mobley. You can't go wrong either way. I think Scotty's had a great season, but for me, he's number 3.
Yeah, and the other argument they made was wins, and I can't accept that with Rookie of the Year. The number one pick's probably not going to win a lot of games because he got drafted by theoretically the worst team in the league. So I don't understand using wins for the Rookie of the Year race. One thing I did, when I talked about Wes being good with numbers, so he helped me out create this graphic. I kind of got into the weeds looking at per touch stats. So I went in and I got Cade Cunningham's points per touch, potential assists per touch, and turnovers per touch. And I was able to compare that against other players' Rookie of the Year. And if you just look at the bar graph, so if you go to the Motor City Hoops Twitter, you can see this. But his bar graph, his bars look eerily similar to a guy a lot of people talk about in Luka Doncic. Do you like the Luka Doncic comparison? Because I've really, really pushed back previously, Omari, but I'm starting to buy in more and more again.
I think they have some similarities. For me, I don't like the comparison as much because I think Luka's much more of a forward and Cade is much more of a guard. And I think and it's hard to tell on TV, but Luka is massive. Like, he's every bit 6'8", like really wide shoulders. Like, he's a big dude. He has a size advantage that Cade will never have, even though
Pistons
Cade
will
is
see
6'6".
him on Wednesday, right? That's the matchup Wednesday night.
So I would just tell Pistons fans, like, just look at Luka and Cade if they ever match up against each other. And Luka is just way bigger than Cade, and for me, it's hard for me to make that comparison because I think they just attack the game differently. And Luka has a flair and just like a footwork level that most players could not match, including Cade. With that said, I think Cade is probably a better shooter than Luka, will be a better shooter than Luka. Cade just also, like, he attacks the game more like a Chris Paul to me. Like he'll just break the defense down. Just the way he attacks the game is different. So, but to your point, you looked at the numbers, and like Cade's numbers do compare pretty favorably to Luka's, and Cade's also playing on an inferior team to the Dallas team that Luka played for as a rookie. So Luka probably has some advantages there that Cade didn't have. But I don't hate the comparison. Like, for me, I'm just kind of getting into the weeds a little bit too much, probably.
So do you think, because I've been thinking a lot about this, do you think the biggest thing for Cade to do is add more like muscle, some more weight to kind of play the way Luka does? Because Cade, or should it be a focus on explosiveness and becoming more athletic and those type of things? Because I think I'm bought into, he's athletic enough, but he's going to beat you with his craftiness, his footwork, his change of direction, and then adding 10, 15 pounds of muscle is actually going to make that even more effective because he can utilize those angles and those type of things. Which camp would you fall in? Because I think some people are going to push back and say, no. He can't add any more weight because then he'll be even, quote unquote, less athletic.
Yeah, his game is never going to be athleticism or explosiveness. To me, just add more muscle. He's already deceptively strong. Like, he can move guys out the way and get into the paint. If he could do that even more, to me, that's going to make his game a lot more effective. So definitely for me, it's more of a weight and strength type of thing. One comparison I never hear for Cade is Darren Williams, as far as a guy that's just really smooth, stockier build, but he could use that to his advantage. And if you could get to, like, he's bigger than Darren Williams, or at least taller, but if you could just kind of have that more stocky build and that aids your game, to me, that's what you should focus on.
So let's transition to the tank race, because that was all over Twitter on Sunday night after the Pistons had won their third game in a row. And then guess what? The basketball gods, karma, whatever you believe in, rewarded the Pistons, and the Oklahoma City Thunder blew out the Phoenix Suns by 20 on Sunday night. So as we stand, the Pistons are not going to finish with the first or second worst record in the NBA. It's between 3 and 5. They have the same amount of wins as it stands on Sunday night. Should be whenever you guys listen to this on Tuesday morning, because there's no games on Monday. The Thunder have one extra game, and then they're 2 behind or ahead, I guess, depending on which way you look at it. This always gets kind of confusing for me whenever you're talking about losing, but two game difference between the Pacers. They shouldn't catch the Pacers because the Pistons probably aren't going to win another game this season, but the Thunder have a couple wins on their schedule that could possibly come. I know you kind of have some strong feelings about this whole tank. I feel like the Pistons have done everything they possibly could without being an utter embarrassment. How do you feel about that?
When Carson Edwards and Braxton Key are playing big fourth quarter minutes, and leads you to an Indiana Pacers team that has some guys out too, like Miles Turner, but still significantly healthier. It is what it is at that point.
Halliburton's playing, Hild's playing. Like, it's not like nobody was. Omari, I literally didn't know who some of those guys were on the Oklahoma City Thunder roster. I didn't know who they were. And I'm a pretty big basketball fan.
Yeah, I'm looking at the roster like, what? Like, what is happening? Like, this doesn't even make sense. They had 10 guys out. Like, they're sitting like Trey Mann. Like, I don't doubt that he's injured. Like, I don't have any Trey Mann intel, but like, when you're benching rookies, like, that's just an entirely different level.
I think Poku did play on Sunday, I think. They have 20 picks anyway. Like, if they want to get to the number 1 pick, they can just trade some of them. I don't know what they're going to do with all. What is Sam Presti going to do with all those picks, Omari?
It is an interesting case study. Like, they have way more picks they can realistically use. Maybe the stars will align and they could actually cash in a bunch of those picks for the right guy. I mean, it's really, really smart team building because, every year you have a star or French star who's ready to move on. And if you could just toss a bunch of picks at a team, they'll probably say, sure, why not? But the other thing about that is if it times with OKC being pretty good, a lot of those picks are worthless, or I won't say worthless, but obviously lottery picks are more appealing than late first rounders. I don't know. Like, I think they're the most interesting team in the NBA just because they're basically doing the process, but arguably even more shamelessly, just the way that they've acquired so many picks. or maybe not more shameless, maybe smarter, I should say, the way that they've maximized assets. But we'll just have to see, man. I have no clue how that's going to work out.
I mean, the process would have worked for the Sixers if they would have drafted the right guys. We talked about this before the episode. Like, they just didn't hit on all those picks. I just want to give the numbers here real quick between having the third worst record and the fourth worst record. If you have the third worst record, you have only a 4% difference in being the 1 through 3. You only have a 4% difference in being 1 through 4. Like, nothing really changes. And I think both of us agree this is a 3-person at the top draft, maybe 4-person at the top draft. And so it doesn't really change that much. I don't really care whether they end up third worst or fourth worst.
I feel the same way. And I've said this a lot on Twitter over the last week because, like, to me, it just sucks to see fans see young players lead the team to victory despite being shorthanded, playing good basketball. They're, like, stressed over the standings. Like, it really does not matter. They won the lottery, that mattered. Like, they got Cade. At the end of the day, successful rebuilds are because of good front offices and not because of lottery luck over and over. You see teams like Cleveland and Minnesota who got top 4 pick after top 4 pick multiple years in a row and did nothing because they missed the picks. They didn't make the right trades. They didn't make the right free agency signings. Lottery luck is a factor, but it is probably a smaller factor than most teams would anticipate. If you get 2 top 4 picks in the span of a few years, a good front office is going to take that and run with it. The Grizzlies got Jaren 4th overall in 18, Josh 2nd, which they rose up 5 spots or 6 spots to do, by the way. And their third best player this season was Desmond Bane, and he was the 30th pick. And all their guys are like mid to late first-round picks for the most part, even some high second-round picks, so they could all play because their front office finds the right guys. And for the Pistons, it's the same thing. Like, either the front office could find talent or they can't, but whether it's 3rd, 4th, 8th, there's going to be a guy there who is either an all-star or an above-average talent, so it's just finding that guy.
Yeah, let me just run through a few because I did this earlier in the year. So this is teams in the last 20 years. I promise, guys, I won't go through all of them, but some of the more recent ones who got back-to-back top 5 picks, some of these are even more than 2 years. The Suns, 16 to 18, Dragan Bender, Josh Jackson, DeAndre Ayton, 1 out of 3. The Magic, Oladipo, Aaron Gordon, Mario Hezonja. Charlotte, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and Cody Zeller. Kings, Tyreek Evans, DeMarcus Cousins. The Cavs, like Irving, Thompson, Dion Waiters, Anthony. Like, it just doesn't guarantee anything. I think you said it best before we recorded. If the Pistons are going to build this thing and turn into true contenders, it's not just going to be continuous luck in the lottery. It's because Troy Weaver and the front office hit on the pick. If they end up with the number 7 pick, they just can't blow that. They have to get a quality player. Maybe it's not the second star this team needs. You may not get that at number 1 in this draft, but you just can't blow it. But even being in the top 5 doesn't guarantee that.
It doesn't. I mean, this draft may end up being better than it looks going in because sometimes drafts are like that. But none of these guys are sure things to me. Every single guy has some sort of drawback that makes you question how good their ceiling would be. And it would not shock me at all if a guy like Mathurin or Keegan Murray or Jalen Duren, like one of those guys, ends up being better than 2 of the guys who go top 4. So people love Jaden Ivey. I think he's a great prospect, but he's got some stuff he has to work on, you know?
Absolutely.
So this draft especially, like, I wouldn't be stressed about it at all. Like, I like Chet, like, you know, like I've said before, like, he's number 1 on my board, and maybe I'm starting to change a little bit now. But again, like, none of these guys look like sure things to me. So at the end of the day, more so than the pick, the Pistons have cap space. And to me, that will decide the outcome of this rebuild more so than that pick. To me, there's no guarantee that any of those guys in the top 4 are going to be better than what we've already seen from Saddiq Bey. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and the biggest X factor in this draft is a guy that we don't even know if he's going to enter the draft or not. And you can't find any film on him because he didn't play basketball this last year, and that's Shaedon Sharpe. That's a guy who a lot of people think could end up being the best player in the draft, and nobody has any idea where he could go. I've read things and listened to things that said he could end up being the number 1 pick, that like GMs may fall in love with him that way. He could be at the back end of the lottery, or he may be playing for Kentucky next year. We have no clue. Like, it's just crazy. I want to do this real quick, and then I do want to talk about the teams at the top. I want to go through we're going to go through the bottom 4 teams right now, including our Pistons, and I want you to give me the most interesting prospect to put on that team. Okay? So
sure.
The Orlando Magic.
I would go with Chet. They have some good guards. Like they've invested in good guards over the past few drafts. You have Cole Anthony, who's had a pretty good season. RJ Hampton may become something. You just got Jalen Suggs. You also have a guy in Franz Wagner who could probably play the 3 or the 4 pretty well, and he's like 6'10". To me, you just add Chet to that group. He's probably a hybrid 4-5. I know some people don't see him at the 5 at all because of the height, but just a really good toolsy center defensive presence. I think he's a guy that could probably play with the bigs that they already have because he can shoot. But I just like Chet for Orlando Magic. Chet to me just seems like a guy that would fit the Magic really well.
I like chaos. I watched The Joker on Saturday night, Friday night with my wife. And so I'm going to say put Jaden Ivey there and let's just see all those guards fight it out and see who comes out at the top. I did not go see The Batman because that movie is 3 hours long and I cannot sit in a movie theater for 3 hours as Wes rolls his eyes at me. So I will wait until that comes out on Hulu or Netflix or however we can watch it. I ain't going to a movie theater for that. The Houston Rockets.
Houston Rockets, so of course they just got Jalen Green. They have a lot of good guards too. They also have Christian Wood. So, honestly, I kind of like Chet for them as well, just because we have Christian Wood already. Like you've got some good guards, and I just mentioned Jalen Green. Like Josh Christopher is probably more of a wing / forward type guy. But then you've also got Şengün, who's probably a 4. But I think Şengün and Chet.
That'd be a good combo, right? Like Chet would make up for some of Şengün's limitations. And then you talk about good passing bigs, those two guys together.
Oh, absolutely. Good passers. Şengün's not quite a shooter, but really good inside. He kind of reminds me of Paul Gasol in some ways. And then obviously Chet, who could be the rim protector, who could protect him on defense, and then also space on the floor. To me, that's one of the best young court cards in the entire league. So I like that a lot. And I can see Ben Caro being good there as well, but just not to the same extent because you have Şengün, who's probably better on offense and defense. You have Christian Wood, who may not be a long-term piece for them, but I just think Ben Caro is very fit dependent.
Oklahoma City Thunder.
Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm actually going to go with Ben Caro for the Thunder. Ben Caro or Jabari Smith Jr.
Somebody that can score.
Somebody that can score. They just need a guy that's going to come in and complement Shea to me. So if you can get one of those two guys, and to me that's a no-brainer. They have a lot of good guys in that team. I like Trey Mann a lot. I tweeted last year I thought Trey Mann was one of my favorite players in the draft, a guy who you look back at a few years and it's why was he not a lottery pick? But he was still close. I think he went 16th. But OKC has a lot of young guys who are intriguing, but they just need somebody who's going to come in and get a bucket.
All right, I'm going to make this a little more interesting for our listeners. Chet, Jabari Smith Jr., Paolo are off the board for the Detroit Pistons.
Chet, Jabari Smith Jr., and Paolo are off the board. So who do they pick?
Yeah, who do they pick? Who's the most interesting?
Is Shaedon Sharpe included in this? Because he hasn't declared yet.
Yes, he is.
Well, you got to go with Shaedon Sharpe because I think he's a better overall prospect than Jaden Ivey. Dude's just an absolute tier 1 athlete. You put a guy like that next to Cade Cunningham, he's 6'6", great size. You have to go with Shaedon Sharpe right there. I think Jaden Ivey could become a good basketball player, but there's enough rough edges with him that makes me pause. And I say this we've seen Shaedon Sharpe, but we haven't. So we're kind of just going for a mystery box in him, but I would go Sharpe.
Shaedon Sharpe's number 5 on my board. I finally added him to the list. I don't know what he's going to decide to do. It's a really interesting. Everything they've said is that he's going to go back to Kentucky, but color me intrigued with Shaedon Sharpe, and I would take him number 5 as well. Let's get into some guys at the top, some teams at the top. I want you to give me your top 3 teams as true contenders, East or West. They can all come out of the same conference. Who are your top 3 teams here real quick before we get to segment 3?
I'm going to go with the Suns just because they've been so dominant in a season that's had a lot of really good teams. Parity's been really great this season. And the Suns losing to a Grizzlies team that's super banged up does give me some pause.
And then they lost Sunday night. Then they just lost to the Thunder. But Devin Booker didn't play Sunday night, so
there just be some late season fatigue too. They already have 60 wins, so at this point you're probably starting to wind down some. But Phoenix by default, and I would put Milwaukee in that group just because they're the defending champs. We know what Giannis can do. Just a complete beast in the playoffs, and it's just hard for me. It's hard for me to pick both teams over Milwaukee in a 7-game series. But I'm going to go with the Celtics as well for that third team because, one, USA Today, the free press is on the USA Today network, so they did a poll of all the beat writers before the season started. Which team do you think? Every category, basically, Coach of the Year, Eastern Conference standings, Western Conference standings, MVP, all that. And I put my eggs in the Celtics basket. I picked their coach for coach of the year. I think I picked them finishing like second or third in the East. And I also picked Tatum as my MVP. And it looked really bad until the calendar turned. And now it makes me look really good. So I'm just going to continue to pat myself on the back and just pick the Celtics for my number 3 here.
Yeah, so I got the Suns and the Bucks as well. And then I actually have the Golden State Warriors. Like, I've been all in on that ever since the end of last season and the offseason. If they're healthy, if Steph Curry is able to come back healthy, I just think it's a roster like Clay's shown enough. Jordan Poole is an absolute bucket and an X factor. I just think that's a team that can really do some damage. If they're healthy, they can keep it all together.
I agree with that. Like, Warriors are a really, really tough team to leave out. But Steph kind of cooled off after a really hot start, and he's still like a top two point guard. So Steph cooling off is still like a top tier player. But the injury woes have just been so consistent this season that I think I'm at the point now where I just don't know if I trust them from a health standpoint.
All right, we're not going to be able to dive into it, but we also wanted to give our fraud contenders. So, teams at the top, in the top 4 or 5, probably top 4, that you don't think really have a chance to win a championship. One team.
Sure. Well, I mean, they're probably not even in a contending category now, but just Chicago, like, really good start. They've had some injuries, and their record against top teams has been really bad this season. And they kind of had that buzz early on, but now I think I'm at the point where I don't know if they get out the first or second round.
Yeah, I'm going to go with another team that had a really big offseason, just like the Bulls, made a lot of moves, and that's the Miami Heat. I didn't buy into their moves in the offseason. I know they're the number 1 seed in the East right now. I just don't buy it. I mean, they may make it to the semis. They may make it to the conference finals, but I don't think they win an NBA championship. I don't think they get to the NBA finals, and I'm glad we're not going to be able to really dive into this because my second team was the Memphis Grizzlies, and I know you wouldn't like that. So we're going to move on to segment 3. So stay with us. When we come back from this short break, we'll be going one-on-one. This week, I'll dive into the story of how Motor City Hoops started and my Pistons fandom began.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
So, Bryce, it's been funny getting to know you really over the last 8 months or so because you had the Motor City Hoops pod, which turned into this, of course, and you kind of built equity in the Pistons Twitter. Just being a basketball super fan and knowing yourself about the Pistons. And you probably love basketball more than anybody in Pistons Twitter. And that's just because I've got to know you a little bit more. But the way you got into this is like really, it's probably not something that people would expect. And I'm just really curious to hear sort of your backstory here because I think people are going to be intrigued by it.
Yeah, so people have asked because all of a sudden, every once in a while, it comes out that I live in Kansas. So we've talked about this, Omari. I sent you guys a video of my son pulling posts out in the country the other day. What'd you think about that video, that countryside?
You've told me about, your country roots. And sometimes I think you assume that we don't believe you. I believe it. You don't have to convince me, but I did enjoy the video.
So, but I still live in Kansas. I grew up not really with an NBA affiliation. The closest NBA team is 4 hours away. The Denver Nuggets, the Thunder are 5.5 hours away. I was just an NBA fan. I truly was, Omari. I was truly a fan of the going to work team. I loved Chauncey and Rip, Tayshaun, Ben Wallace, all those guys. That I really did enjoy that team, mostly because I hated the Lakers. But essentially, I just like players. Allen Iverson was my favorite player, Steph Curry, before I started doing this. But how I got into this was a former teammate started Motor City Hoops, a part of a different network. Shout out to Hoop Heads and Mike Cleansing. And he asked me to do it with him. He just asked me to come on and be a co-host. I was like, yeah, I want to. Like, it was kind of like a childhood dream that I never thought would happen. And, now I'm 35 years old and I got a chance to do it. He eventually left. I started doing it solo. And I went the guest route and I started asking on people like you and Rod and James, people from the NBA in general, like Keith Smith, David Aldridge, fellow American University alum, Jake Fisher, draft guys like Richard Stamen, like just all these people. I won't name it. So many people. Wes reached out at one point. He came on for the 50th episode, and that's kind of how our relationship struck up. And I asked him to join at one point, and he's been invaluable to Motor City Hoops and what it's became and the opportunity now. So it just continued to grow. And then, as we've told before, I reached out to you one time, and here we are now. And I'll be honest, Omari, like, I never thought this is what it was going to be. Like, the fact, me and Wes text sometimes about this, the fact we get to do a podcast with a Pistons beat writer backed by the Detroit Free Press is unreal. Like, it's so cool, and it's just something I never could have imagined was going to happen.
Yeah, but the thing about journalism and really most industries is that the best way to break through, if anything, is just to do it and just become good at it. And when you reached out and asked if I wanted to join, for me it was easy because I had already done the pod a few times and was already thinking about doing the podcast game in some way. But it's just tough during the season to do that type of thing solo, especially with all the travel. So you reached out, it was just like, like when you're in a play and then like the light turns on and it's like this dramatic thing. I was like, oh shoot, like, okay, like this is it. Like, this is a situation. And because you already had it going, I knew it'd be an easy pitch to the Free Press. Like, hey, there's this guy named Bryce. I've done his pod a couple of times. He's good. Here's his podcast. Here's a link. Listen. And all I had to do was listen and say, oh yeah, this is pretty good. Yeah, we can get behind this. So it was a process to actually get it off the ground. Like, that's what I always just tell people in general, like when they're trying to get into journalism or whatever, like just do it. Like, just reach out to people, talk to people. I always talk to bloggers or kids at college, wherever it may be, we were trying to get in, and it's just doing it. And I mean, you played Division I basketball. You kind of built the Motor City Hoops following up to where it was slow at first. And I know toward the end, you were getting like over a 1,000 listens, which is really, really good. And it also helps that Pistons fans are crazy and they consume everything. And so when you have a fan base that's like that, it does kind of raise the floor a little bit. Yeah, I mean, you were already doing it. So it was a pretty easy pitch. And all I had to do was come in and, just be a beat guy. And you could come in and talk about the player aspect. And I think it's worked out pretty well. And so we're just going to sit here and pat ourselves on the back for the third segment, guys. Like, me and Bryce are awesome.
I do want to throw out some numbers just for anybody who's listening and maybe started up a podcast or whatever, because it was frustrating at times. We only had 100 downloads, 100 listeners a week for a long time with Motor City Hoops. And it was like, I didn't know if that was good or bad or whatever. And I still don't. Like, it doesn't really matter, but it was something that just grew. But the other thing is, so many people helped us along the way. Like, I got on Locked On Pistons with Koo, and that helped me grow Motor City Hoops, and all sorts of people on Twitter. Duncan Smith helped Motor City Hoops grow. And I'll tell you what's cool now. Here's the coolest thing. And you just mentioned it with other journalists. I get a chance to pay it forward now. I have people who reach out and like, hey, I've seen this is only 16 months. We've only been at Motor City Hoops. I've only been a Pistons fan for 16 months, and we've been able to grow into this. But people will reach out like, we've seen your growth. How did you do it? What advice do you have? And it's just cool that I can help them and be a part of that. And what's really interesting, this just happened the other day when I had Rod Beard on. He was like the third guest whenever we went that way. We recorded an episode, and it didn't record any of his audio, Omari. It didn't record any of it. And so I was like, man, the episode is blown. I'm not going to be able to drop it. Like, I've already said I'm going to record with Rod. I reached out, and he's like, no, Bryce, I got you. We'll record the very next day. And he re-recorded with me the next day. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. He didn't have to do that. It happened to me on a podcast I went on as a guest here in the last week. They forgot to hit the record. They had to ask me to come back on. It's like, no sweat, guys. I got you. It's happened to the best of us. And it's just cool to be able to like reciprocate everything that people did to me back to the, other people now.
No doubt. And occasionally people are afraid to ask what they want. And, I always try to tell people, ask me questions, how to get in or what work for you. People, like, good people generally want to help you.
Yes.
They generally want to see you succeed. And if you're putting in the proper effort and they see that you're working hard, like, you'll be surprised at what you can get. Like, one of the writers for Detroit Bad Boys, I was in Boston and he was in town, not being in Boston, and he asked me to meet up with him and just kind of talk about stuff. And it was for the game. I was like, yeah, cool. Like, we went to a restaurant, just chatted for like 45 minutes. He was like, yo, thank you. And I was like, dude, you'd be surprised how many people don't even ask to do that. Like, the fact that you asked just puts you at the top of the list already. So So it's just cool to see success stories like that. It's been awesome to work with this pod. This is episode 6, and we've got a lot of cool stuff coming up, guests and whatnot. So obviously stay tuned for that. No, it's cool to see people wouldn't even think that you weren't from Detroit or from Michigan, even in general. Didn't grow up watching the Pistons, but you put in the work, and here we are. So that's all it really is.
Yeah, and that's what's cool. Like, I truly love the Pistons now. I'm all in. I'm invested. Obviously, I took the trip out there. My wife knows it. My kids know it. What's funny is people out here are just now finding out. Like, people out here in Kansas. And they're always like, well, why'd you pick the Pistons? But I've started to get followers from like other teachers, my students, people I know around town. But a lot of them still have no idea. I think the trip to Detroit is where they all started to kind of, figure it out. I just want to say this, and I know everybody's, what the coolest thing of all this is the relationships. I've met literally some of the closest people in my life right now are people I've met through this, people I talk to on a daily basis, you two, other people that, just have reached out. We struck up a relationship. Now we exchange numbers. Now we text. We talk basketball. We talk about being dads. We talk about all sorts of things. And that's what it's all about. So it's just been cool, the whole ride. And like you said, I'm juiced for what's going to come in the future for the Pistons Pulse. And what's really cool is we got some exciting guests coming on the next couple of weeks. Our first guest coming on next week. I'm juiced about that. The week after NBA draft guy. It's a lot of big things coming for the Pistons Pulse.
Big guest coming up. I'm excited for you guys to see who it is. And yeah, we're going into the offseason now, so it'll allow us to fully transition into maybe a looser format and just dive into draft and whatnot all the way. So don't do comments this week, everyone. But again, we appreciate all the feedback we get, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even on Twitter. So if you enjoy what we're doing, make sure you comment. Make sure you let us know. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Omari for the second. Follow Bryce at Motor City Hoops. And read all of my work on freep.com. As we always do, we want to give proper credit and thanks to the people behind the scenes. Our editor, Kerry Jr. II. Our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado. And of course, lead sports editor and also our executive producer, Kirkland Crawford. Also give another shout out to Wes. Wes, I promise you we'll get your voice on this podcast at some point. Unfortunately, not today, maybe not next week, but someday. We'll see how we're looking in May. And again, we want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of The Pistons Post. Rate, subscribe, comment, follow us on Twitter, and tell a friend so we can continue to grow.